Okay, before I start, a couple of things. The first thing is, in the true spirit of Occupy, for those of you that have been on camp, if anybody wants to engage in the hand signals, this might work better in the Q&A as opposed to during the presentation, because if you all disagree, I'll be quite put off. But if anyone wants to engage in the hand signals, which are, I agree, I'm not sure, I disagree, I think I've remembered those rightly, please do, particularly in the Q&A. It's a good indication of what we're all thinking and differing opinions and so forth. The second thing is, I have to go through a little bit of a background, very briefly, to sort of set the scene. The first thing is, if you've seen the abstract, this presentation will not be very much like the abstract at all. But for any of you that have done research and done your PhD, which of course you will have done, you know that particularly in your first year, it's just constantly changing in terms of critical reflection and that. So it might not be exactly what the abstract's like, but it is about Occupy, and it stays true to that. The other thing is, the idea of what I'm doing today is that I'm just going to put forward some very disjointed ideas, and so they might be quite separate. There's not necessarily an amazing flow. I'll put forward some disjointed ideas, and the idea is, shamelessly, I'm after some feedback, right? So the discussion bit will just be fantastic. So that's that. So just to let you know what I am actually going to do, I'm very briefly going to talk about my theoretical framework, but only briefly, but just to set that context. I'll then be looking at breaking down some ideas about the 99%, and who are these 99%, and should we be treating them as the 99%? And secondly, I'm going to be looking at this idea of coercive power and then manifestations of violence of the state, separated into those two things, with some final conclusions. So, a little bit of background as to what this... Oh, the other thing you need to know is that I'm actually a bit of a frustrated artist who's posing as an academic, and I keep a reflective diary using cartoons, which I've gone over in ink and then scanned in. So I keep a reflective diary. I just, when I have some ideas, I draw an image as opposed to maybe writing it down. So you will find that there's a various amount of photos of my cartoons, shall we call them, throughout the presentation. This first presentation is because I originally was doing my PhD on pubs and bars and the nighttime economy and the cooperative movement within pubs and bars. And whilst I was doing this and writing my proposal, all this was kicking off outside, right? And I thought, well, what a fantastic opportunity. This is something that made me feel far more passionate about than pubs, though you might disagree if you've seen me in action in the past few nights. However, so that's the background to it, and I ended up looking at changing completely into looking at the Occupy movement. And in terms of what I've done so far is I've done a series of qualitative interviews with Occupy Liverpool in the UK, but a lot of my actual activism and where I've been has been the Occupy London site, and often working with a lot of their breakout groups, because since many of the Occupy sites aren't actually present anymore in the physical space, there's a lot of different breakout groups dealing with various issues. So that's the background. I can actually get started now. I don't want to go massively into the theoretical considerations at all because it's not my viva for a while. But I did just want to give you a background. I am using a critical reading of using a Gramscian framework, and there is some rationale for that. What I've done here is just three criticisms of why you shouldn't use a Gramscian framework, and then I'm responding to those criticisms to justify why I'm using it. The first one is Occupy itself. What's quite difficult is Occupy is the site of kind of battling theoretical perceptions and battling is a bit of a strong word, but you know, everyone's bringing their own theories and people are discussing it and seeing which is the best way to go. So there is no sort of theoretical framework that would be necessarily appropriate. However, one thing that's been said quite a lot is this idea of dominant, already established theoretical frameworks can be quite dominant, and people think that Occupy being this new thing, that it's the dominant theorising practices often rule and overlook what's going on. Like, we're missing new stuff because we're so set in our old theories. But my argument against that is this idea, the classic thing about not using grounded theory is the idea of preconceptions and passion. Because this is such a passionate subject for many of us, we're so deeply involved, I think denying that we have any kind of pre-established ideas is a bit futile. And the other thing is the idea of, is very briefly, criticism of Gramsci as too time and place specific. Well, I think we need to very much be careful not to erase histories. I think the histories of resistance, contestation are extremely useful, so to just throw those away. And also Gramsci is incredibly elastic. It's, you know, it's known to be sort of incomplete, and we can work with that in a critical reading. And then the final one is one of Richard Day's anarchist arguments, talking about the logic of affinity. And with that, I have a slight issue that he's declared that Gramsci's dead, which he is. Obviously, but in saying that, it's not, I think the Gramsci is still extremely relevant, and this logic of affinity argument where we're supposedly going to get together in this amazing solidarity completely ignores the issue that, you know, this 99% is lumping people together, and there are a lot of divisions, through neoliberal societies. Quote here that we're divided along multiple lines of inequality, and that's got to be acknowledged. So, right, the 99%, as I said, this is just going to be disjointed ideas, and you have your thoughts, and then we'll have a discussion at the end. Danny Dorling recently was at the Writing on the Wall festival, and sorry about this quote, it's verbatim and it doesn't read very well. But basically what Danny Dorling was saying was that we need to start breaking this 99% down, and one of the ways in which we can do this is by thinking of the 90% as the 9% and the 90%. Now the 9%, according to Danny Dorling, and again this is quite deterministic and stuff, but the 9% are those earning sort of between, I think he says, £35,000 a year and £120,000 a year. Yeah? And what's interesting that Danny Dorling is saying is that the 9% are siding with the 90%. It's actually in their selfish interests to not side with the 1%, and that's quite an interesting feature. So we do need to think very much about the 9% and breaking that down. I did say it was going to be disjointed, okay? The next thing, I lost my place, hang on, is this is a quote from Occupy Liverpool, and I'll just read it out. There's something wrong when people have to do this, as in Occupy and the protest, to get attention. The question is kind of what has driven these people to do this quite extreme act. Now, whilst people have had a really good time, in the Occupy sites, it is putting yourself under duress. It's not necessarily fun all the time, but it's about these people who feel strongly enough about it to do it. And you're putting yourself in a situation that could be damaging them for a number of reasons. So there has to be some valid reason to it. And I just wanted, in particular, my own experiences of Occupy, and places I've been, people I've spoken to and stuff, is that there is, for me, and this is not evidenced in any way, shape or form, but I've often spoken to people and I've been like, hi, where are you from? And people have often said, well, I've actually got no fixed abode at the moment, I've got no fixed address, yeah? And I've noticed very much that those who have been in Occupy that I've spoken to have been really not, I'm bopping down there in my Kurt Geiger shoes and my fancy clothing, right? And then there's other people there who clearly suffer from a lot more, have a lot more problems and, for want of a better expression. So thinking about that in terms of who are these people, told you it's going to disjoint us. Right, more cartoons. The title of this, it's absolutely true because I read it in Daily Mail. Daily Mail is a hideous newspaper, and there's a satirical media song about it. The cartoon here about the 1% tattoo parlour, this is actually stuff that I got from news articles from the Daily Mail, yeah? Calling people crackpots, mad leftists, hippies, left-wing freaks, mob rule and American hating. And another issue about the 99% is that we are so clearly divided, yeah? In many respects. And in saying that we're divided, evidence for that is, if you think about in the UK, the August riots, I was just fascinated by the whole, on Facebook, I ended up deleting about 25 people on Facebook, if not more, and only had about 2 friends anyway, right? So I deleted them because it was just this kind of people who should be all part of this 99% showing a bit of solidarity, just being like, you know, oh, chav's this and all the rest of it, yeah? And I was just horrified. I'm thinking, you know, why are you not thinking this is, you know, being a bit more supportive and stuff? So that shows a number of divisions. So, and that's just, sorry, just at the side, some references in terms of demonisation of the working class. So we're divided by media and media representations of things. The other thing, just to summarise, is this idea about what the Invisible Committee asked in the coming insurrection is, how do we find each other? So if all those things are true or partly true or up for discussion that I've just mentioned, how do we find each other is really important. You know, this 99%, we've got so much in common, but we've got so much that's not in common, and we need to find each other. I've been drawing a little bit on Paulo Frere's work in terms of this idea of the cartoon is supposed to be that we start to internalise the image of our own oppressor. We're operating under this system. And I think, again, this is evidenced by the fact that, you know, that this quote at the bottom is from Occupy Oakland, I think, talking about how many workers cannot see the movement's relevancy to their own lives, but feel the pangs of the crisis, but we're still not united. One of the really key things about Occupy in terms of bringing that solidarity together for the 99% is a really good quote here from a member of Occupy Liverpool, saying that I think sometimes people are just happy with how corrupt the world is. They think that they've got a big house and a nice car and a nice telly, that's them sorted. People tend to think of anti-capitalism as not having a nice car and a nice mobile, etc. I think if you burst the bubble, everyone secretly knows what is going on, but they don't really want to. And but if you make it obvious, people have got to question it. And at the end it says, everyone knows there's no escaping the fact it's like McDonald's. I don't know anyone that thinks it isn't anything but cardboard, but we still eat it. Okay? This is leading me on to my next section about coercive powers of the state. Don't want to dwell on this too much, I'm already talking far too much. This is obviously your classic Gramscian quote, looking in terms of political society and civil society, and it kind of it's reflected in the next section. Okay, so onto this kind of coercive power of the state, and there's obviously overlaps between the civil society and the political society, and that's pretty obvious as I go through. This is one of the cartoons that I drew because one of the first things I noticed in going through the very first pieces of literature about Occupy was a lot of discussion about how time-consuming everything was, how tedious everything was, how, you know, just how we didn't have the time for this. Everyone was bored when people were speaking. Someone said Chomsky went on for far too long, apparently, and etc., right? But the thing being that in terms of this, what Naomi Klein said when she was at Occupy Wall Street, she said what doesn't matter is whether we can fit our dreams for a better world into a media soundbite. Now, ideally, that shouldn't matter, yeah? But in terms of the culture, and this is very broadly speaking, and I know Ritzer and the McDonaldization of society, it's got its critiques, but in terms of the culture of this now portion-controlled media and everything else that so much of us are so deeply it's so deeply embedded in us, it is sort of turning into this, can I have my McRevolution meal with my free Zapatista figurine, right? And it is a concern. So I think Naomi Klein was quite dismissive there. Yes, it shouldn't matter, but in many respects it does matter. And this is evidence as well through the Occupy Liverpool stuff in many respects, because they were speaking about their experiences of the support they had. And in Occupy Liverpool, they were saying that people would be, if you put it under the Occupy, if you put it under the anti-capitalist banner, people just weren't really interested, right? They were like, oh, I don't know about that. But then if people engaged and stopped and spoke to people on site, they would be saying, you know, if they said, well, what do you think about people getting off with tax, multinationals not paying tax while the public sector's being cut? And they'd be like, yeah, I agree. And they'd list all the things in like bullet points, and people would go, yeah, I agree. Yeah, it needed to kind of be broken down. And that also links back to the people shying away from what the anti-capitalist stuff suggests.